Washington, President Donald Trump announced Saturday that the military police were ready to deploy to Minneapolis amid ongoing protests in the aftermath of George Floyd's death.
"We have our military ready, willing and able, if they ever want to call our military. We can have troops on the ground very quickly," Trump said as he left the White House Saturday afternoon on his way to Florida for the second attempt at the SpaceX launch. "They're using their National Guard right now, as you know.
They've got to be tough. They've got to be strong. They've got to be respected," Trump said, speaking of Minnesota government officials, adding that there were protesters that needed to be taught that they can't do this.
The move would take service members from around the country and prepare them to deploy to Minneapolis if the governor elects to use those resources.
Active duty forces are normally prohibited from taking part in domestic law enforcement, but the Insurrection Act of 1807 allows for a state legislature or governor to request assistance in the event of civil unrest.
Jonathan Rath Hoffman, assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, said in a statement that the Secretary of Defense and the chairman have personally spoken with Governor Walz twice in the last 24 hours and expressed the department's readiness to provide support to local and state authorities as requested.
At this time there is no request by the Governor of Minnesota for Title X forces to support the Minnesota National Guard or state law enforcement, he continued, adding that the U.S. Northern Command was ordered to increase their alert status from a 48-hour recall to a 4-hour status in case the governor requested their assistance.
Protests erupted in Minneapolis and in several cities in the U.S. this week after Floyd, a black man, died when a white Minneapolis police officer used his knee to pin Floyd down on the ground for almost 9 minutes after taking him into custody. The incident was caught on multiple cameras and Floyd could be heard pleading with the officer, saying, "I can't breathe."
Trump has been critical of Minnesota's response, calling the Minneapolis mayor radical and unprepared to deal with the protests.
At a press conference Saturday afternoon, Attorney General William Barr said that the Department of Justice was prepared to take all action necessary to enforce federal law and reminded the public that it was a federal crime to cross state lines to participate in violent rioting.
Barr and others have suggested that some of the Minneapolis protesters have been from out of town.
Trump backed up Barr's statement in a tweet, writing, "Crossing state lines to incite violence is a federal crime, and the federal government will step in and do what has to be done, and that includes using the unlimited power of our military and many arrests."
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said Saturday that he would fully mobilize the Minnesota National Guard for the first time since World War II to bring an end to the wanton destruction protests that he blamed on protesters from outside the state.
Maj. General John Jensen, head of Minnesota's National Guard, said that he was not consulted on Trump's decision to active the army but that he thought it was a prudent move.
You may have seen or heard that this evening the president directed the Pentagon to put units of the untied states Army on alert to possible operation in Minneapolis. While we were not consulted as it relates to that, I do believe it's a prudent move to provide other options available to the governor if the governor elects to use those resources.